With James McCann hitting free agency, the Orioles are in need of a backup catcher this offseason. Well, let's run through who the top candidates could be to help out Adley Rutschman. All coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, November 8th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to kind of kick off our free agency preview series here on the Locked On Orioles podcast. Going to go through every position on the field that the Orioles could be targeting to add to their roster through free agency this offseason. And I'll give you my wish list of the top 6 players at that position that I think the Orioles should go after. And today, it's backup catcher, because even with Adley Rutschman's struggles in the second half last year, he is the Orioles starting catcher. He is an all-star catcher. He is one of the best catchers in Major League Baseball. But James McCann, his backup for the last 2 years, is now a free agent. Should the Orioles look to bring McCann back, or should they look elsewhere in free agency for that backup catcher job? I'll give you my top 6 wish list coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So this is my backup catcher free agent Orioles wish list. Now, might be the least exciting of all of these wish lists I do. We'll go through left-handed relievers, right-handed relievers, lefty starting pitchers, righty starting pitchers, right-handed outfield bats. We're going to go through them all. And it's probably going to be more exciting names in those because those players are going to play a bigger role on this team. When you're signing a backup catcher, you're signing a guy to do a pretty gritty job like James McCann did for the Orioles the last 2 years. But he is now a free agent. The O's could bring him back. We'll certainly get to that. But I'm going to go from number 6 to number 1 in terms of the free agent catchers that are out there. And this is my personal wish list. Number 6 being, okay, I'd be down for it. And number 1 being, this is my top target that the Orioles should go get to back up Adley Rutschman in 2025. And let's kick it off with number 6 on the list. And that is the veteran 35-year-old switch hitting catcher, Yasmani Grandal. You may know the name Yasmani Grandal because this guy has been in the big leagues for a while now. And honestly, he's still a useful player. Now, I say 35 years old because technically, as I'm recording here on Thursday night, he is 35. But when you are listening to this, November 8th is his birthday. So happy birthday, Yasmani Grandal, making him 36 years old as he heads into the 2025 season. And yes, that is not young, especially for a catcher, but he's been a productive player for most of his career. Now, Grandal spent last season with the Pittsburgh Pirates, actually signed a little bit late with Pittsburgh, and he was the starting catcher for a stretch there. They didn't get what they wanted out of Henry Davis, their number 1 overall pick in 2021. He spent a good chunk of the year in AAA, even when he was in the big leagues. Davis played a lot of outfield. They had another top catching prospect get injured in spring training. So Grandal came in and kind of helped out this team a little bit. Now, he only played 72 games for the Pirates this year, but in 243 plate appearances, he was basically a league average hitter, 95 WRC plus, 228 average, 304 on base, 400 slugging, 9 home runs for Grandal, about a 10% walk rate and a 19% strikeout rate for Yasmani. Now, the reason I would like the Orioles to go after him is that, first of all, he'll be cheap. His deal was 1 year, $2.5 million that he signed with the Pirates last year to be their backup. He's now a year older. Something like that, 1 year, $2 to $3 million should bring Grandal in. The savings from declining the option on Danny Coulomb right there gets you your backup catcher. Should be fairly cheap to bring him in, and he's used to handling a good amount of innings behind the plate and playing a solid amount. Now, we're unsure how much the Orioles are going to want to rest Adley Rutschman, whether on the bench or in DH, how much they're going to want a backup catcher to play next year. Maybe they want to bring in a backup who can handle the bat a little bit better than James McCann so they can play him a little bit more, maybe rest Adley more so they can avoid what happened at the end of this year. But Grandal is used to it. I mentioned his 243 plate appearances this year. That was his least in a full season, basically ever in his career. I mean, you got to go back to 2013 when he was just coming up and played 28 games with the Padres. The last time he has had this few plate appearances. I mean, he has been pretty close to a starting catcher from 2014 all the way through 2023 in his big league career. And yes, he is 36, but it's a guy who is going to be handling less of a workload, but can still handle a bit of a workload back there. And listen, I won't cover it up. Grandal had two pretty bad offensive seasons in his final 2 years with the White Sox, 2022 and 23, where it is 68 and an 80 WRC plus in back-to-back years. Now he rebounded to be more of a, again, league average hitter this year, and that's because he found his power stroke. The slugging percentage went up. He got his walks back up. He had a career low walk rate in 2023, and he also had a career low strikeout rate this season. Grandal has always been a guy in his career who walked a ton. I mean, if you go to like the best years of Yasmani Grandal, he was throwing walk rates out there that were pushing 20%. I mean, that is ridiculous, but he was also striking out a solid amount. He dropped down to a 19% strikeout rate. Again, the lowest of his career in a season when he had this many plate appearances. Pretty impressive from a guy at age 35. And he started to hit the ball hard again, 91.1 mile per hour average exit velocity for him. That's a pretty good number, especially for a 35-year-old. He is a switch hitter, which allows him to be a little more versatile at the plate. But it was also kind of a tale of two halves for Grandal. In the first half with the Pirates, about 140 plate appearances, he had a 34 WRC plus. He was quite terrible. Now, after the All-Star break, 107 plate appearances, he had a 172 WRC plus in the second half. That is 72% better than league average. If you take all catchers in baseball who had at least 100 big league plate appearances after the All-Star break in 2024, none of them hit better than Yasmani Grandal. He finished that season incredibly strong. And also as a switch hitter, he is better from the left side, which kind of fits in well with Adley, a switch hitter who is better from the right side. It could be a nice fit. Now, listen, it wasn't that long ago that Grandal was like a dominant hitter. Dude had 400 plate appearances and had a 157 WRC plus with the White Sox back in 2021. Like, yeah, that's a couple of years ago, but this is a guy who throughout his career, I mean, you just look at the year by year, he was well above a league average hitter every year of his career. When he first came up in 2012, all the way until 2022, has always been an offense first catcher, but a guy who still brings some defense. Now, last year, he may have been the worst catcher in Major League Baseball when it comes to throwing out runners. And Adley's not the best at that either. So maybe not a great fit, but in terms of StatCast, he was the 8th best framing catcher in the majors last year, which means he is stealing strikes for his pitchers, something Adley and McCann didn't do an amazing job of in 2024. So bat could still be there. He's got some defensive skills. The really big question for him is, yeah, it'll be cheap, but like, is it worth bringing him in at 36 years old? Can he still produce? That would be the question the Orioles would kind of have to answer. Number 5 on my list is the 30-year-old right-handed hitting catcher, Carson Kelly, who split his 2024 season between the Tigers and the Rangers. Now, I got to shout out John Becker of FanGraphs. He does his free agent matrices every single offseason. Basically, the best part about it is he compiles every contract projection for free agents from every site out there and averages them all out for every player. He keeps track of every minor league free agent signing, major league, coaching changes, everything. It's an amazing, amazing resource that's pinned on his Twitter. Definitely go and check it out. But his free agent matrix predicts that Carson Kelly will get a 2-year, $14 million contract in free agency this offseason. So the first thing would the Orioles be willing to outbid another team on a 2-year deal for a backup catcher when you hope you'll have Samuel Basallo in that spot in 2026? That's certainly something to think about, but Carson Kelly did have a bit of a rebound season in 2024, just like Grandal did. He had his best offensive season since 2021. Now, again, he was basically league average in that season, so it's not like we are talking about, him lighting the world on fire. He was 99 WRC plus. He was basically a league average player. 91 games, 313 plate appearances, hit 238, 313 on base, 374 slug, 9 home runs, 8% walk rate, and an 18% strikeout rate. Again, a guy who really cut his strikeouts, cut his K rate by 9%, the lowest strikeout rate of his career last year, which is a nice sign. Just like Grandal, the Orioles struck out a lot last year. You bring in a backup catcher who really wasn't swinging and missing too much. Now, he started the year with the Tigers, and he was pretty good. He was above league average as a hitter, then was traded to the Rangers at the deadline, one of the Tigers veterans they traded and then somehow got better and made the postseason. Kelly was traded to the Rangers, and he was not a good hitter down the stretch with Texas. Now, he's not like the, hitting the ball hard, high exit velocity guy that Yasmani Grandal is, but one thing that helps out Carson Kelly is that he's almost 6 years younger than Yasmani Grandal. That's definitely helpful, especially as a catcher, but he's also more of a square it up guy. He makes good contact, makes more consistent contact, and can avoid the strikeouts as well. And I really think the best part of Carson Kelly is that he has some offensive upside, right? I mean, he was more of a league average hitter this year, but 2019 and 2021 with Arizona, he had some good catching years there when he was kind of serving as the starting catcher for the D-backs back then. But more so, he kind of does everything well defensively. He's not crazy elite at anything defensively as a catcher, but just does every facet of the game well and can handle the bat a little bit. Is only 30 years old, kind of a perfect combination to be a backup catcher at this point. The question would be, is someone going to pay him to be a starter? I don't think so, but he could be one of the more coveted backups. And if he does want a 2-year deal, the Orioles are probably going to be only in the market for a guy on a 1-year deal to kind of bridge the gap to Samuel Basallo. But if he is willing to take a 1-year deal, I mean, he was 63rd percentile in blocking, according to StatCast, 85th percentile in caught stealing, and 68th percentile in framing. Basically, he was right around the top third of all defensive catchers in all the 3 big categories in terms of being a defender back there. And he's worked with a lot of different pitching staffs. I mean, this is a guy who has been in the big league since 2016. He's been with the Cardinals, with the Diamondbacks, Tigers, and Rangers. So he's been around, worked with a lot of different pitchers. Just seems like the really solid base level guy, if he's willing to take a 1-year deal, to come in, have a pretty high floor and help out this Orioles team. And again, he's a good chunk younger than Yasmani Grandal, probably doesn't have the offensive upside that Grandal has, but he also has a much better injury history than Grandal. So maybe a safer bet is Carson Kelly if he is willing to just take maybe more like a 1-year, $7 or $8 million deal instead of that 2-year contract. But those are guys 6 and 5. Next up, I want to talk about 4 and 3. We're going to talk about 2 catchers who both have spent most of their careers in the AL East. So why not bring them back there? We'll chat about that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Ibotta. Now, listen, do you love the holidays but just kind of hate grocery shopping? Well, Ibotta is making your Thanksgiving easier with cash back on everything you need to make your perfect holiday meal. So you can get the turkey and your favorite sides for free. This month, Ibotta is giving new users 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving feast. That's right, 100%. Just add the offers in the app to redeem for everything you need to make your Thanksgiving feast complete. All you have to do is shop at your favorite retailers and upload your receipt. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods, so you can get everything you need for the holidays. So download the Ibotta app now and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving feast starting November 1st. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONMLB. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And that's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So we are continuing on with my Orioles backup catcher free agent wish list. Number 6 on the list was the veteran Yasmani Grandal. Number 5 was Carson Kelly. And on we go to number 4 on our list, and that is Danny Jansen, the 29-year-old right-handed hitting catcher who has spent his entire big league career in the AL East. So he knows the Orioles well. He knows these opponents well as well. Now, Jansen had spent his entire career with the Toronto Blue Jays. We know him well. He's actually hit the Orioles pretty well in his career, so I wouldn't mind him being on the Orioles. But Jansen came up in 2013 and was just a really solid catcher for the Blue Jays for a while. Was more of a defense first guy in his first couple of seasons, but then his bat really broke out. Had a good year in 2021, had an incredible year in 2022. Now, it wasn't as a full-time starter because Alejandro Kirk and others were there, but he had a 141 WRC plus and about 250 plate appearances. It wasn't healthy the entire season, but was really good when he was out there. Backed it up with a good 2023 season with a little bit more playing time. But then he kind of started to drop in his contract here. That's not generally what you want. He was okay with Toronto. The Blue Jays were going nowhere. They were looking to deal him, and they sent him over to the Red Sox for a group of, it was like 3 or 4 mid-level prospects that Boston sent back in that trade. And with the Red Sox, he was even worse. He had a good walk rate. Otherwise, he was hitting 190 with Boston after the trade and was somewhat close to unplayable. But otherwise, it was kind of a cool moment for Danny Jansen this year. He played in that game, that resumed doubleheader where he actually ended up playing for both the Blue Jays and the Red Sox when you look at the box score of that one. So that thing was pretty cool. But otherwise, his full stats this year, 94 games, 328 plate appearances, hit 206, 308 on base, 348 slugging for an 89 WRC plus with 9 home runs, 12% walk rate, and a 19% strikeout rate. Now, for Jansen, that was pretty much the worst offensive season of his career in 2024. Now, he did fracture his wrist in spring training, and he got a late start to the year. So you could argue maybe, he never fully got healthy. But the weird part is that theory doesn't really make sense because he was awesome in April and May with the Blue Jays and then completely fell off for the rest of the season. He had a 182 WRC plus once he returned in April, a 148 in May when he was like fully healthy for the entire month. And again, he wasn't playing every single day because they still got Alejandro Kirk back there as well. But after that, he pretty much fell off a cliff offensively for both Toronto and Boston. Now, as I mentioned, overall, he's been a good hitter in his career. He was better against lefties this year, but in his career, not really like a lefty matcher, more of an even splits guy against lefties and righties. But it was a career high walk rate this year, had a low K rate, low whiff rate, low chase rate. There are still factors in there that can make him a good hitter. And again, he's still only 29 years old. Now, the question for Jansen with the Orioles is kind of a similar question, but a bigger issue than it was with Carson Kelly. It's that free agent matrix by John Becker predicts a 2-year, $20 million deal for Danny Jansen. And again, with Samuel Basallo hopefully coming soon, I don't know if the Orioles are going to be willing to hand out a 2-year, $20 million deal to a guy to be their backup catcher. Now, if Jansen, again, doesn't find a starting job and is willing to take a little bit less money, it could happen. I think Jansen will probably end up being paid to be someone's starting catcher at some point this offseason rather than signed to be a backup on a team like the Orioles. So that's why I have him down at 4, because I think it's just less likely he signs to be somebody's backup. But he's got the tools. I mean, according to StatCast, he was the best blocking catcher in Major League Baseball in 2024. Adley Rutschman was also like top 5 in that category. So there would literally be no wild pitches or pass balls if the Orioles brought in Jansen as well. He's not a great thrower. He's, a solid framer, but he's kind of an interesting case because he's younger. He could be a starter. The bat has high upside, but it's coming off a down year. I don't think the Orioles would pay him to be a starter. But again, if he's willing to take more like 1 year, 8, 9, 10 million to be a backup, he'd be a guy who you can have in there for his bat, who can play some defense. And I think would just be a really nice backup to have behind Adley. Then we go to number 3, and it is Kyle Higashioka, the home run stroker. John Sterling, one of his best calls. There's not a lot of great ones, but one of his best calls right there. Now, Higashioka, you may know the name because he also spent a lot of time in the AL East with the Orioles. Now, he was not there this season. Kyle Higashioka was traded in that big deal of pitchers to the San Diego Padres. And it was, Michael King, who went over in that deal as well, went for a player you may have heard of. His name's apparently he's a big-time free agent this year, Juan Soto. I think he's all right at baseball. I'm not really sure. But either way, Kyle Higashioka went over there. He had been a backup catcher forever with the Yankees since 2017, been a big part of their team. Was always a defense first, never a huge offensive guy. And then he goes over to San Diego, and he starts to hit. Now, he only finished the year with the Padres with a 105 WRC+. He played in 84 games, 260 plate appearances. He hit 220 with a 263 on base and a 476 slugging with a 6% walk rate and a 28% strikeout rate. But he had a career high 17 home runs on the year for the 34-year-old right-handed hitting catcher. And career best. It was a career best offensive season for Higashioka. Now that free agent matrix from John Becker says a 2-year, $13 million contract for Higashioka. A little lower because, again, he is 34 years old. And a lot of his offensive production did come from he pounded sliders all year. And he used a shorter porch in left field in San Diego to come up with some home runs. Now, he played in a shorter porch at Yankee Stadium before, and that didn't always turn into a lot of home runs for Higashioka. But 15 of his 17 home runs this season went to left field. And when you move to Camden Yards with that big wall out there, probably sucks up a lot of those home runs. Actually, StatCast says that Higashioka only would have hit 9 home runs had he played all of his games at Oriole Park this year. So yeah, he could take a hit over there. And a lot of his production came from the home runs, again, with the 220 average. But he had a 10.9% barrel rate. That is something under the hood that is really, really good that can be repeated. Sweet spot percentage, one of the best in the league, means he's hitting the ball on the bat on the perfect spot every time, which is leading to more hits and more power, even if he's not hitting the ball with insane exit velocities. And it was kind of a streaky season for Higashioka. He was terrible in April. He was terrible in May. He was terrible in September. But in June, July, and August, he was one of the best hitters in baseball. From June 1 through August 31st, in that 3-month stretch, he had a 153 WRC+. He was the 18th best hitter in all of Major League Baseball for basically half of this season. Only Austin Wells of the Yankees was a better offensive catcher, and just barely throughout that stretch. And listen, he's a good defender back there, good framer. He's solid with caught stealings. He's not a great blocker, but Adley's elite at that, so they could complement each other because Higashioka's a better framer and a better thrower back there. And I know the Matrix says, predicting 2 years, $13 million. I'm just not sure that a team is going to be willing to give the 34-year-old 2 years. I'm not sure a team wants to make him a starter. I think the Padres will want to bring him back, but I'm not sure if it's as a starter or more in a backup role. He's kind of in an interesting spot. And again, it's very similar to Danny Jansen, where if he's willing to take a 1-year deal and be a backup, but know he's going to have some solid playing time, because that's what the Orioles want to do to give Adley a little more rest next season, then maybe he could buy in. And again, he's 35, so maybe he'll be a little bit cheaper than Jansen, which is why he's ahead of him. He's coming off a better offensive season than Jansen had. I had these two very, very close to each other, flip-flopped them, but he is number 3 because, again, he knows the AL East well. He's coming off a good year. He's a good defender. And I just want to scream Kyle Higashioka, the home run stroker, as he takes one deep at Camden Yards. But that leaves me with 2 players on my wish list for backup catcher. One name we know very well. The other, I think, is maybe by far the best catcher on the market this offseason. We'll talk about them both to finish off the episode coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. And this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by the DK Law Group. We needed a law firm. Do you want the legal runaround, or would you rather have a no-nonsense approach? Well, you get the latter with the DK Law Group. The DK Law Group specializes in real estate law, estate planning, business law, and family law. They're tech savvy, they treat clients like family, and they focus on keeping your legal solutions simple. And one of the things you'll quickly notice with the DK Law Group is their transparent pricing. They believe in clarity in cost and that no one should be left in limbo. So contact the DK Law Group today at dklawmd.com. Locked On Orioles listeners can even call today to schedule a free 30-minute consultation when you mention the tagline, Empowering Legacies. So to finish things out, we move to the top 2 free agent backup catchers on my Orioles backup catcher wish list. And we go to number 2. You know this man well. Maybe this is a little bit of homerism. Maybe this is a little bit of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But to be honest with you, I'm putting James McCann at number 2 on this list. 34-year-old right-handed hitter who spent the last 2 years with the Orioles as Adley Rutschman's backup. Now, we don't have a prediction on the Matrix because nobody has predicted James McCann's contract, but basically Spotrac, which does a great job with contracts across sports, predicts he would get a 1-year, $3 million deal in free agency. I have a feeling McCann would probably get something closer to $5 or $6 million wherever he signs, but he is a guy who knows at this point, hey, he is a backup catcher. He is not going to be anybody's starting catcher. He knows Baltimore well. They love him in that clubhouse. It would be an easy transition to bring him back for 1 more year before Basayo is ready. And again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. He did well in that backup role. I think everyone can agree he was a good fit as Adley's backup the last 2 years and was just huge in terms of leadership in that clubhouse. One of the main Orioles leaders for the past 2 seasons. Now we know he was a below average hitter this year, 89 WRC plus for McCann, 66 games, 233 plate appearances. McCann hit 234, 279 on base, 388 slugging, 8 home runs, 6% walk rate, and a 24% strikeout rate. But for James McCann, like, he was red hot in the second half. He had a 120 WRC plus in the second half. Was a much better hitter than Adley was in that second half, kind of saved the Orioles at times. And his metrics defensively are not amazing. Like, he doesn't do anything super well behind the dish anymore at age 34, but he works really, really well with his pitching staff. He's not terrible at anything behind the plate. He's a better thrower than Adley is. And he's kind of that perfect veteran backup catcher who can give you some hits from time to time. Like, he was just better offensively this year. Honestly, much better offensively this year than he was last year. He had his best offensive full season since 2019, what he had with the Orioles this year. Now, again, he was a below league average hitter, but he was really good in the second half, and he helped the O's. And you know what? Again, could the Orioles upgrade? Of course they could. But in terms of my wish list, the fact that I only have 1 other catcher ahead of James McCann on this wish list, again, maybe a little homerism. Maybe you could argue, hey, Connor, he should be down at like 5 or 6. Like, yeah, he should definitely be on the list, but maybe he should be a lot lower on it. If you think that, let me know in the comments here. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. But I just got to have him there. If you want to hear more about James McCann's 2024 season, did a season review episode on him back on my October 21st episode. So make sure to go back and check that one out for more. But yeah, I think, you know what? If it's not broke, don't fix it. Bring him on back for 1 more season. But number 1 on my wish list for Orioles free agent backup catchers to be behind and help out Adley Rutschman this year is, drumroll please, Travis d'Arnaud. Not only is he probably the biggest name on this free agent catcher board, it is a very, I'll say it, it's a fairly weak free agent catcher class this offseason. d'Arnaud is not only the biggest name, but he's probably the best player on this list. Travis d'Arnaud, now a 35-year-old right-handed hitter who has been with the Atlanta Braves for a good while now and has become a free agent. And the free agency matrix predicts he will get a 2-year, $26 million deal in free agency. Now, that number is the biggest of any of those predictions I've talked about for these 6 catchers so far, and that's warranted. Like, he's a guy who I'm not sure if he's a starting catcher at this point, but someone could pay him to be their starting catcher. And if they do it, there's no chance he signs with the Orioles if someone's going to let him catch 110, 120 games next year. Obviously, with Adley Rutschman, he's just not going to get that chance in Baltimore. But he could get the chance to catch a good amount, right? He is still good behind the plate, just a really solid defender across the board. He's a good blocker. He's a solid thrower. He was an average framer this year, but in the past, even the last 2 seasons, he's been a very good to elite framer. And again, those defensive metrics, you want to look at like 2 or 3 year pathways to get a better look of who the player really is. d'Arnaud, considered around the league, still a good framer as well at age 35, does everything well defensively, and he still hits. Like, he had a little bit of a drop off in 2023 with Atlanta. He had an 84 WRC plus, but he had 18 home runs, had a 121 WRC plus in 2022. And then this year, he was only a touch above league average as a hitter. But for a 35-year-old catcher, you will take that. He'll be 36 next year. He turns 36 in February, but he's still producing at the plate. He's still good behind the dish. 99 games for d'Arnaud this year. He actually played a little more than he thought because Sean Murphy, for a long stretches, the Braves' quote-unquote starting catcher, was just so bad at the plate for a while this year that d'Arnaud even ended up getting some more ABs. 341 plate appearances. He hit 238, 302 on base, 436 slugging, 15 homers. It's a 103 WRC plus with a 7% walk rate and a 26% strikeout rate. Now, with that offense, what he really does is just mash left-handers. It's something he's done in his whole career. It's something he's specifically done over the last few years with the Braves, is just destroy left-handed pitching. Destroy it. He had a 146 WRC plus against lefties this year, 115 last year, and a 165 in 2022. That was something James McCann was still doing with the Mets and the White Sox when the Orioles first traded for him. It was like, hey, he can, hit some lefties. Maybe you throw him in there a little bit more against left-handed pitching. And the Orioles did that early on in McCann's tenure with the O's, but not as much later. You can absolutely do that with Travis d'Arnaud. So even if he's not going to catch against a left-hander, like, you could DH him against a lefty because how good he is against left-handed pitching. And that is a real asset for having him on the roster because he can do more than just be your backup catcher. Now, he's not going to play another position, but he gives you more flexibility to be more of a danger when he is catching or even when he's not, if you do want to DH him against lefties. Now, he did have a career high strikeout rate this year with the whiffs and the chases going up. That's something that generally happens to hitters as they get older. He's not the only one. It's still a little bit concerning, but the underlying batted ball data still looks good, still hitting the ball pretty hard. And again, as I mentioned, still a good defender back there. And everything I've heard and people I've talked to, like, known as a very, very well-regarded clubhouse guy. So if you do lose James McCann and how big of a leader he was in that Orioles clubhouse for the past few years, you can feel safe knowing that in Travis d'Arnaud, you got a better defender and better offensive player than McCann, and also a guy who is really, really able to be a leader in that clubhouse as well. And this is a guy who has been on some winning ball clubs. Remember, he won a World Series with Atlanta in 2021. Travis d'Arnaud has played in 57 career playoff games. Now, he's only a 703 career OPS guy in the playoffs, so he's been an okay postseason hitter in terms of production. But 57 playoff games, this is a guy who has been around the block and is not getting nervous in postseason scenarios anymore. And not that he'd be in there every day. Again, Adley would still be the starter. d'Arnaud would still be the backup. But if you're facing a good lefty in the postseason, you can DH Travis d'Arnaud or even put him behind the plate and feel better about it than when the O's did that with James McCann in Game 1 of the Wild Card Series. Now, for d'Arnaud, it's kind of interesting because the Braves had a $8 million team option on him for 2025, and the initial reporting was they were going to pick up that option. Then when it came to the deadline, they declined the option and let d'Arnaud become a free agent. Now, he's going to be coveted. Somebody might pay him to be their starter. Someone might pay him, 10, 15 million just to be a DH who catches occasionally. I think the Orioles should do that. I think this is a team that was looking for a lot of last year to get more right-handed at the plate. I personally think that they should go up, maybe not give him a 2-year deal, but say, hey, Travis d'Arnaud, do you want $15, $16 million on a 1-year deal to know that you'll DH against lefties and catch a good amount and still help this team? I think you have the ability, especially on a 1-year contract, to up that pay, maybe more than he's worth, but you got to do that to get free agents, to get him here to be not only a really good backup catcher, but a productive hitter against lefties who can help this team not just by being a leader and a backup catcher, but by being a legitimate offensive force, especially against lefties as well. I think that is a win-win for this Orioles team if they can find a way to go and get Travis d'Arnaud. But that is my top 6 wish list for the Orioles for free agent backup catchers. If you would change the rankings, if there's other free agent catchers, like if you're really into Elias Diaz or Jacob Stallings or Kurt Casale and you wanted those guys in the list, let me know in the comments. Of course, I want to hear your thoughts about this backup catcher position for the Orioles. But that'll do it for today's episode. That'll do it for the week here on the pod. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will be back Monday. If we get any Orioles news over the weekend, of course, we'll have it covered. If not, expect some more of these free agent wish lists, and we will also continue to review the seasons of all of the Orioles on the 40-man roster. That's coming up next week, starting when we are back on Monday. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.